Every time a division gets a new champion, matchups open up. With Sean Strickland defeating Israel Adesanya, who seemed to be the most dominant force in the middleweight division, had a Brazilian wrench thrown into his reign, that was Alex Pereira, who is now a light heavyweight. It looked like after Pereira moved up, that nobody was going to be able to defeat Adesanya anymore. But now that we know that Strickland defeated him, what do you do with the middleweight division? There are several fighters who are open right now, including the champion, of course. And there's a lot of people saying different things, from the brass to the fans to different fighters. Everybody has an opinion on who should fight who. It's a great time for the middleweight division right now. So we know that originally in the post-fight press conference, that Dana and Adesanya's coach were saying that a rematch with Adesanya makes sense. It's something they're not opposed to. But when you look at the fans' opinion, we have multiple polls. I'll use just one from Nightwish Stories. Shout out to Nightwish Stories. They had a poll of over 430,000 votes, with 62% of them saying that Adesanya does not deserve a title shot. And there's a lot of fans saying that it should be Dricus Du Plessis. Some people are saying Jared Cannonier. Some people are saying if Khamzat beats Paulo Costa. There's so many different options at this point. So let's match up the top of the middleweight division as it is. And we're going to start with the champion, Sean Strickland. We'll look at every single matchup that makes any sort of sense for him right now. In my opinion, the number one pick to fight Sean Strickland next is Dricus Du Plessis. It's not an Adesanya rematch. Dricus is undefeated in the UFC, has only gone to a decision one time, and has 5 other finishes, currently riding an 8-fight win streak, where he defeated 2 top contenders in a row. He defeated Derek Brunson by second round TKO due to corner stoppage. A lot of damage was inflicted on Brunson, and then finished the perennial contender of the UFC, one of the best fighters in the world, Robert Whittaker, and did it in 2 rounds, made the fight look pretty easy. Considering all of that together, and knowing that the fight with Sean Strickland is going to be very interesting. That's a very interesting stylistic collision. In my opinion, this is the fight to do next for Sean Strickland. That's the number one pick. Can you imagine the fight between these two? Dricus has the power, he has the strength, he's very well rounded, he has decent takedowns, decent boxing, a lot of power in his hands. Even if things are going wrong for him, like when he fought Trevin Giles, he always has the ability to come back and knock the opponent out with one punch. But how does he do that against Sean Strickland? It's very hard to have a comeback knockout against a guy who's so defensively minded, right? One of the best defensive fighters in the UFC. If Sean Strickland is winning, it's hard to ever come back from it because there's not enough holes, not enough to exploit, not enough to expose out of Strickland's striking. And we know Dricus sometimes could be a bit too reckless going forward, maybe running into some of the counter lefts or potentially right crosses from Sean Strickland. But there comes the takedowns. If Dricus can get Sean Strickland to the ground, we know that Dricus' Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is especially good. The way he was able to pass Whittaker's guard, sticking him to the ground, landing big ground and pound, that is going to be a very dangerous area for Sean Strickland, who stands up very tall, which naturally exposes the hips and legs to takedowns. Against Adesanya, it wasn't really a thing because Adesanya doesn't shoot takedowns unless you're Alex Pereira coming from kickboxing. Sean Strickland's been wrestling a lot longer than Adesanya has, so it wasn't a path that he wanted to go to. But for Dricus, it might be the other way around. Dricus is really good on the ground, and if his punches aren't getting through and he's getting countered, he could switch it up better than most other fighters in this weight class, outside of Khamzat and maybe in the future Bo Nickel. Dricus is very well-rounded and can make a lot of things work. He has so many tools to work with here. That's why this is the best fight to put together. Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis. But look at some of the other options for Sean Strickland. I would say the number 2 fight would be if Khamzat beats Paulo Costa, for multiple different reasons. Now, there isn't a long history of Khamzat beating contenders at middleweight. This will be his second fight in the UFC in this weight class, but he is one of the biggest names. A lot of people know about him. A lot of people want to see him fight for the belt. And beating a guy like Paulo Costa is pretty good to put your name into the hat. It's not nearly as deserving as Dricus Du Plessis, but I do believe there is something there that would give him a title shot. About equal to Khamzat, if not, you can even argue it makes more sense than Khamzat Chimaev, would be Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier, in my opinion, is coming off the best performance of his entire career. The way he looked against Marvin Vettori outside of the first round, which was a bit dicey for him. From rounds 2 to 5, he looked like a world beater. And he has a win over Sean Strickland 2 fights ago. He beat Sean Strickland in a split decision. A lot of people think that Strickland probably should have won that, but it was very close, and we know a rematch will also be close. Cannonier hits like a truck. The guy is physically strong. He's very good in the clinch. And stemming off the Vettori fight, he's much more aggressive with his stand-up. And that's the kind of power and aggression that will make it interesting to see if Strickland's defense can uphold that. Now knowing that Strickland's going to have newfound confidence as a champion going into this rematch. But there's 2 things going against Cannonier. Number one, he did get a title shot not too long ago. And number two, he's only coming off of 2 wins, right? He doesn't have this kind of win streak that Dricus has or Khamzat Chimaev has. You know, the win streak is not the same. If he was like on a 5-fight win streak, then he is very deserving of the title fight. And also, we cannot forget that he was the backup fighter behind that Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland fight. And then I would say the 4th fight would be the Adesanya rematch, right? That's the 4th most deserving in my opinion. The reason why I'm not going to have it as high as the others is that he's 1-2 in his last 3 fights. So he has the worst record going into a title fight out of all these contenders. Number 2, he already got his immediate rematch after losing to Pereira the first time. He was a long-reigning champion, and usually when a long-reigning champion loses, they get an immediate rematch. He already got that opportunity. He already cashed in that check. It can't happen again, especially losing against Strickland in dominant fashion. Those are 49-46 scorecards against him. If it was a close fight, split decision, people thought he won, controversial and stuff, okay, it's a different story. But it wasn't that. Sean Strickland nearly dominated him for 5 rounds straight. The only thing going for Adesanya is the fact that he has a big name and he brings big numbers. So fans do want to see him fight for the title, of course. But again, like I pointed out, look at that 430,000 voted poll. 62% of people say he does not deserve a title fight, which actually surprised me. That's a lot of people that don't think he deserves a fight with Sean Strickland next. He needs to earn his way back. I think 1 win he should be back in there. So for Sean Strickland, the number 1 deserving is Dricus, by far, in my opinion. Number 2, I'll say maybe Khamzat. Number 3, Jared Cannonier, which is really close with Khamzat. You can switch them too. And then number 4 is Adesanya. But now let's look at Adesanya. He's the number 1 contender. Losing the belt, you automatically drop to number 1. Who should he fight next? So if Dricus fights Sean Strickland, I think it's pretty obvious you put the winner of Khamzat Chimaev and Paulo Costa up against Israel Adesanya, especially if Khamzat wins. Right, that would be the fight to make. It'd be a very difficult fight. We're gonna have to see how Khamzat's wrestling translates into a Paulo Costa fight. That guy's massive, you know, he's very strong. So it's gonna be a very different kind of takedown defense compared to the guys he fought in the welterweight division. He did fight John Phillips at 185, but John Phillips is not Paulo Costa. We know Khamzat couldn't take down Ikram. Of course, Ikram is a credentialed Sambo artist, but he's also much bigger than the 170ers that Khamzat has taken down. The gist of it is the 185ers are going to be harder to take down and hold down than the guys he fought at 170. Paulo Costa is a massive middleweight. If he's able to get through him because of his wrestling, let's say, I think Adesanya might lose pretty convincingly against Khamzat. It's going to be a wrestler versus striker matchup. Perhaps Khamzat can bring in some things that Strickland showed, but the thing is, Khamzat's defense is his glaring hole in his striking. He doesn't move his head. He doesn't have a great guard. He's a very aggressive kind of striker that lacks some of the defensive components to make him a well-rounded striker. But he is very powerful. He can hurt you anytime in the fight, and he's most likely the best grappler out of every middleweight. There's nobody on his level right now. So I would say that's the number 1 deserving fight for Adesanya next, especially if Khamzat beats Costa. But even if Costa beats Khamzat. For number 2, I would have the Whittaker rematch and the Cannonier rematch for different reasons. Cannonier's coming off a win, and knowing that Cannonier looked amazing in his last fight, also defeated Sean Strickland, so he has some merit looking up at the rankings to fight the next guy. The only thing going against him is that he fought Adesanya not too long ago, and it wasn't that close. So that's why I say a Whittaker rematch also is kind of on the same level with Cannonier for one main reason. We know Whittaker's coming off a loss to Dricus, so he doesn't have a win streak like Cannonier does. But looking at all these guys that already fought Adesanya, Whittaker came the closest to beating him. In fact, a lot of people believe that he should have won that decision. Whereas that's not the same argument for Cannonier. The second fight between Izzy and Whittaker was a very, very close fight. Now they're both coming off losses. It does make sense to put them together in my opinion. Then we look at Dricus Du Plessis. Of course, the number 1 fight for him would be Sean Strickland. The number 2 fight, let's say he doesn't get it, in my opinion has to be the winner of Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa. That fight would be very interesting depending on who he's fighting. Khamzat would be a difficult fight for him, but I think he could beat him on the feet and show some resistance when it comes to the ground game. That's a very interesting fight actually. If he touches Khamzat with some of those big shots, it's a whole different story, man, than him getting hit by Gilbert Burns. Because Dricus is a massive middleweight. This guy is huge. Because Whittaker is not too small, right? Whittaker's walk-around weight is like 215 pounds. And Dricus looked way bigger than that guy. And perhaps we see some good sprawls and some good takedown defense from Dricus to put some resistance against that kind of wrestling. But let's say he fights Paulo Costa. I don't think Costa can really handle him too well. I think the fight would be competitive for the first round before Costa starts to gas out a bit because of the fast pace that Dricus brings. I don't think Costa is going to be able to fight at that kind of pace for a long time with Dricus especially when takedowns are coming at him, a lot of punches, all that stuff. I can see Paulo Costa having good moments in the first round, especially where Dricus is opening himself up, blitzing down the center line, and maybe gets caught by a couple hooks here and there. But the thing is, Costa doesn't have the best chin. I would say it's average to below average. And that's not good enough, in my opinion, to take a clean shot from Dricus Du Plessis. So I could definitely see Dricus finishing him. It'd be an amazing fight to watch. The third fight, in my opinion, would be Jared Cannonier. That is one of the best fights in the weight class. We got two guys with tremendous power in their hands. Jared Cannonier has developed his takedown defense very well, but he hasn't gone against a lot of great grapplers on the level of Dricus. That's the only thing. Cannonier, I would say, is definitely better in the stand-up when it comes to being patient and looking for openings and not overextending himself too much to get caught. Dricus will probably be the one that initiates first, knowing that Cannonier sometimes is patient for the counterpunch and also has very good leg kicks that's going to cause Dricus to start acting first, you know? But the awkwardness and the unpredictability on the feet from Dricus, would that confuse Cannonier a bit, right? Where he's switching stances awkwardly and offsetting you with angles, letting shots over the top and then transitioning to takedowns. Those things can really test Cannonier's defensive skills all throughout, from striking defense to wrestling defense. On the ground, Cannonier is going to be in some trouble. He's going to be in a lot of trouble because his takedown defense is better than his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu defense. The guy is not great at scrambling with you, evading you on the ground, reversing you, standing up. I don't think it's going to happen too well when he fights someone like Dricus. It's a great fight though. That could go a bit back and forth in my opinion, but I would ultimately favor Dricus. Now for Robert Whittaker, who's the number 3 ranked fighter in the weight class. For him, I think the Adesanya fight makes the most sense, for all the reasons I said before. He and the loser of Khamzat versus Costa are in the worst position right now. The main reason for Whittaker is the fact that he's already beaten so many guys in the top 10. So who does he really go up against? He's not going to fight Dricus again, he just lost to him. Is he going to fight Cannonier again? I think the Adesanya fight makes more sense than a Cannonier rematch. He's not going to fight Vettori. He beat Vettori handily. Maybe he could fight the loser of Paulo Costa and Khamzat Chimaev, or he goes up against someone like Roman Dolidze. That would be interesting. So I would say the number 1 fight that makes the most sense for Robert Whittaker is the Adesanya trilogy. The second fight that makes the most sense, in my opinion, is the loser of Khamzat versus Paulo Costa. Also, Whittaker needs a little bit more time off than the other guys, because he did get finished by strikes. He got rocked in his last fight. So whether it's Paulo Costa or Khamzat Chimaev, it's a new face that he hasn't stood in front of. We know that Paulo Costa allegedly turned on the fight with Whittaker before, or something happened there. So maybe if he loses to Khamzat, it would bring those two together. Paulo Costa has nothing for Whittaker. That fight is one-sided as all can be. Now for Khamzat, we were thinking that Whittaker would be the most difficult fight for him at middleweight. What I will say is I think Whittaker is one of the hardest matchups for Khamzat because his takedown defense is really, really good. He has fantastic striking, and we know Khamzat does not have great defense, but Jared Cannonier showing that southpaw jab hurting Whittaker, Adesanya using it in the second fight too, and knowing that Dricus dropped him with it, it does bring openings for Khamzat to work with here. I think Khamzat's chances are better now than we originally thought against Whittaker. Number 1, there is a possibility he takes him to the ground. Dricus was able to do it from the clinch. Maybe Khamzat could bring that different kind of wrestling style that's similar to the Dagestani Chechen style to throw off Whittaker from defending those takedowns. And also we know that Khamzat has a very good southpaw jab. He dropped Gilbert Burns with it. So we know he throws it well. He has good form, good snap. Everything about his offensive striking is pretty good, man. Some of it is a little too wild when he tries to knock you out, and maybe he can counter Whittaker's blitz with a takedown. It's a lot more of an interesting fight now than I originally thought. But I'm starting to think that maybe Khamzat's most difficult fight is probably Dricus Du Plessis, given the fact that he is so well-rounded, but it might still be Whittaker. It's one of these two guys. The third priority for Robert Whittaker, in my opinion, is Jared Cannonier. This is going to be on a similar level to Roman Dolidze, in my opinion. So Cannonier already lost to Whittaker. He had one moment in the third round because of that southpaw jab, but other than that, he got beat for most of it, right? Like 24 minutes of that fight, Whittaker was winning. But now that Whittaker's coming off a loss, and Cannonier's coming off of 2 wins, and he looked much better in his last fight than he's ever looked before, and knowing that Dricus even admitted that starting the Whittaker and Cannonier fight found him that southpaw jab to land on Whittaker, it does give Cannonier a little bit more to get that rematch. But I think on a similar level as Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze is the number 7 ranked contender, and this fight could possibly be his way to enter the top 5. I don't think Roman Dolidze is on Whittaker's level at all. He has fantastic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a lot of power, but he's so incredibly slow. It just depends on what kind of shots can he catch Whittaker with. That's the only thing. It would be an interesting one to see. Now when we talk about Khamzat Chimaev. So we know Khamzat is fighting Paulo Costa, but let's say he wins, right? So when we talk about Costa, we're going to talk about if he wins too. If Khamzat beats Costa, the fight that makes the most sense for him, I honestly would say it's Jared Cannonier. I think the Jared Cannonier and Khamzat fight is the fight to put together. We also know that Khamzat did hint that he was going to fight Jared Cannonier, and that fight would be extremely interesting to watch. That guy hits so hard. Khamzat does not move his head too well. That's the wrong guy to eat punches by. His takedown defense has gotten better, but I don't think it's enough to stuff Khamzat's entire wrestling game. Just one time that fight goes to the ground, Cannonier is in a very compromised position, but he has the best ability to knock Khamzat out better than anybody else in this weight class because of the power and his precision combined with a long reach too. And with his aggression now, that becomes a lot more alive this time. The number 2 fight, which is roughly close with the Jared Cannonier priority, I would say is Israel Adesanya, for reasons that I said before. The 3rd fight is a title fight with Sean Strickland, and the 4th fight is a fight with Robert Whittaker, which I don't think would happen. Now for Paulo Costa, if he were to beat Khamzat Chimaev, the fight that makes the most sense, I would match him up the same way as Khamzat, but I would reverse Sean Strickland and Robert Whittaker. The number 1 fight is Jared Cannonier, the number 2 fight is Israel Adesanya, and then the number 4 fight is Robert Whittaker, but Costa fighting Whittaker coming off a win over Khamzat is a lot more likely than the other way around. It's mainly because Khamzat is a big name and they would want to throw him in a title fight or something bigger than fighting Whittaker coming off a loss. The number 3 fight is Robert Whittaker, and then the number 4 fight is with Sean Strickland. Given the fact that he would beat a big star like Khamzat Chimaev, there'll be a lot of people want to see that for a title fight, but for sure it's not the first or second priority. So Paulo Costa versus Jared Cannonier would be very interesting, but I think Cannonier just outguns him. He hits harder, he's more precise, he's more patient, he has better counter punching, he's better in the clinch. The takedowns I don't think are going to matter at all, and he has better cardio too. This guy was power punching for 5 rounds at a crazy pace against Marvin Vettori and did not gas out at all. Paulo Costa is not matching that whatsoever. Paulo Costa versus Israel Adesanya, I don't think much changes. I think Paulo Costa would do it a little bit better, but he gets knocked out eventually, I think. Or Adesanya just leg kicks him and jabs him into a decision where Costa's just not exposing himself enough to get knocked out. And then a fight with Robert Whittaker, he gets torched. He gets ran through. I think Sean Strickland's way too defensive against Costa. I think he blocks and evades most of the punches. The only thing is, Costa might be able to win early rounds because of quote-unquote damage, but I don't see him keeping that pace up and not getting countered by Sean Strickland either. So that's pretty much matching up the top middleweight contenders right now in terms of priority. Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis is the next title fight to make. Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker is the fight to make next, and Jared Cannonier versus the winner of Khamzat Chimaev and Paulo Costa. That's how I would match up these guys next. And leave in the comments below, what do you guys think? How would you guys match up the top 6, including Khamzat, so the top 7, I guess, in the middleweight division? So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to give this a like, make sure to subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.